Alrighty, yo, what is going on, everybody? It's your boy, Mr. DDG94, back with another reaction video. So we're going to react to what ruined Saturday morning cartoons. Without further ado, let's get right into it. What ruined Saturday morning cartoons? The government. That's what ruined Saturday morning cartoons. I blame the government. It's always the government's fault. Always remember
when
that,
it comes
kids.
to animation, the 20th century proved to be quite the roller coaster. From movie screens to buffering on computers, cartoons have come a long way and continue to change. Yet there was a time when animation was scarce, where one would be lucky to catch the occasional Disney movie in theaters. But
Facts.
television provided a solution. Saturday morning cartoons, a blissful block of animated content that children and the young at heart could enjoy. A time for kids to get out of bed, grab their favorite cereal, and watch hours worth of cartoons. From the silliness of Looney Tunes to the corny action of He-Man, Saturday morning cartoons became a long-standing tradition for kids around the globe. For over half a century, this custom endured and proved to be successful for both advertisers and networks. But for some reason, in the early 2000s, it all came to an end. What happened to this sacred tradition? Why did all of the major broadcast networks decide to end this block of content? The answer to this question...
You said the early 2000s. You mean the early 2010s, my nigga? The early 2010s is when this shit was all gone, my nigga. The early 2000s, this shit was popping, nigga. The fuck? This shit was popping in the early 2000s. I don't know what he talking about.
Question is complicated because there isn't a single answer. There are multiple reasons why Saturday morning cartoons came to an end, and they take many forms. We have talked about the big three cable channels for animation.
Cartoon Network being the GOAT.
Go back and figure out what ruined Saturday morning cartoons. Before we go forward, I need to explain something to you all. This is a very complicated topic. In the past, I have made videos about Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, and Disney Channel. Each one has a relatively simple timeline, and that's because we are typically dealing with only one entity per upload. But for this video, it goes everywhere. I mean, we are talking about multiple cartoons from a variety of studios, ones that aired on different networks within a time frame that spanned several decades. We see cartoons rise, we see them fall. We see how they evolve over the years and adapt to the shifting landscape that is television. Heck, we even get to see some government intervention. That always makes for a fun video, right? Basically, what I'm trying to say is, this is going to be a challenge to explain because of how much information there is to cover and how easy it is to get lost in it in order to avoid that outcome. As always, we begin with the history of our topic, and it goes all the way back to the late 1940s. Now, during this time, Saturday morning cartoons did not exist. If one wanted to see something animated, they would go to the movie theater and watch some Looney Tunes or a Disney movie. Television in general was in its infant stage, but that did not mean it was completely devoid of cartoons. In 1948, some NBC affiliates decided to experiment with a show specifically made for television, Crusader Rabbit. Prior to this video, I had no idea that Crusader Rabbit existed, but it's the first of its kind. A cartoon that was intended for television. Now, I say cartoon, but the show itself had little animation. If anything, it looked more like a storyboard sequence.
This has been a transcribed program. Crusader Rabbit knew he'd found the one to help, so he planned the escape.
Tiger, it is I, Crusader Rabbit.
You gotta start somewhere. Actually, the show was
I was
of a
watching
satire
this.
of old radio and movie serials, like The Lone Ranger. And who was
I
the
was
first
watching
foe
this.
that Crusader Rabbit faced down? Why, the state of Texas. I'm not kidding.
You should have seen Crusader Rabbit. He was off with a flash, heading for Texas to battle the Texans and protect his cousins, all named Jack.
That was the first saga of the series, Crusader versus the state of Texas. Sounds more like a Supreme Court case.
He knew he could handle the Texans. They were all singers.
The major playing fields for Saturday morning cartoons and television in general
Y'all was really
would
watching
take
this
place
back in
on
the day.
ABC, NBC, and CBS, also known as the Big Three. Now, there wasn't a huge influx of original cartoons at first, which made sense. Animation required a lot of time and money, and television networks were cautious. They still needed to figure out a way to make a profit from such a demanding creative process. So it was a no-brainer to take cartoons that aired in movie theaters and re-air them on television. Tom and Jerry, Looney Tunes. These legends found a home away from home and would, in time, be created specifically for TV. Rocky and Bullwinkle, The Flintstones, Scooby-Doo, Space Ghost, The Super Friends, Underdog, Josie and the Pussycats, Fat Albert, The Herculoids, He-Man, Thundercats, G.I. Joe, My Little Pony, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I could seriously go on and spend the next half hour discussing the old cartoon shows from the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. But that isn't the point of this video.
Facts.
All you need to know is that cartoon shows exploded in popularity, and the Big Three networks figured out a way to make a profit from these shows. Merchandise, foreign syndication. It was a lucrative business, one that led to the creation of some of the most beloved cartoon characters of all time. For kids, Saturday mornings became a sacred tradition where they would gather to watch 4 to 5 hours of animated goodness. This was a time before Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon, before afternoon blocks or streaming tunes online. There was only Saturday morning, and it was good, but it would not last. Change was on the horizon. When people look for an explanation of why Saturday morning cartoons ended, they tend to think that there's only a single cause. It was cable networks. It was angry parents. It was the internet. Now,
It
these
was the
people
government.
are not incorrect, but the truth is, there are many reasons why Saturday morning cartoons came
It
to
was
an end,
the government.
though they did not all happen overnight. It was a gradual decay, and it took many years for those contributors to finally bring down this block of animation. So I am going to review and explain all of the major reasons and how they impacted Saturday morning cartoons.
The
And
government.
the first one that comes to mind is the rise of technology.
The government.
Mario World is here. It's one of the new generation of
Well,
Nintendo
I mean
games.
video
It comes
games too,
only with
yeah.
Super Nintendo, and it's like nothing you've ever faced. Now you're playing with power, superpower.
The 20th century was truly a time of growth for home entertainment, and television was the primary contender. It became a staple of the modern household and ruled supreme during the 1950s and 60s. Yet technology wasn't about to stand still, and new forms of entertainment were on their way. Now, kids still adored their Saturday morning cartoons and would continue to watch them for years to come. But they were also beginning to discover new ways to kill their time. In the 1970s, arcades arrived and provided a new place for kids to hang out. Video games in general were on the
That was
rise.
back in the day when
and
all you
home
needed was a
consoles
nickel.
become incredibly popular in the 1980s. These kids were
All
finally
you
getting
needed was
some
a nickel,
options.
my boy.
They could spend their Saturday morning playing video games instead of just watching cartoons. Videotapes were also becoming quite popular and were showing their worth during the 70s and 80s. Thanks to VHS and other types of video players, families could watch a show or a movie at their own leisure. Sure, it wasn't the newest episode of a show or the latest release at the movie theater, but it opened up some options. These new outlets of entertainment challenged television and siphoned away some of their viewers. I mean, yeah, you would have people who would watch both types of media, but the fact remained. Technology was changing, and it was offering more than just television.
This Panasonic shows you what to do on screen. You can even use a phone to program this VCR.
My parents don't need me anymore. They got a Panasonic VCR too, huh?
If it's Panasonic, it's easy to program.
So we went over the rise of technology. Check. Next is the arrival of cable networks.
In the
A big
government.
reason why Saturday morning
I blame the
cartoons
government,
were so
bro.
popular was due to how few options there were at the time.
Flintstones.
You could watch
Yeah, the
one of the big
Flintstones.
three networks or nothing else really. Go outside? Gross. But in the 1980s, competition arrived, and it started to give these cartoons a run for their money. I know that I said cable networks for this point, but I'm going to add a little more. There were a few more TV competitors. Fox, WB, and UPN arrived, and had
UPN,
their
the
own
GOAT.
lineup of successful
RP to the
Saturday
GOAT,
morning
UPN.
cartoons. Some of these networks also started to air their shows in the afternoon. They knew that kids were getting home from school, and that they would want to watch some cartoons. We also saw a surge of syndicated programs. As I said before in my Disney Channel video, these syndicated shows were higher in quality and were much more successful. There was also this trend of live action sitcoms and how they were becoming popular with teens and adolescents. Why spend lots of money on a cartoon when you could just make a cheap show instead? You can thank Saved by the Bell for that one.
I knew a dog named The Beast. She was a hot little number. Not what you'd expect. There's the sugar.
You forever curse Disney Channel! Speaking of which, the cable networks arrived, and they offered some strong competition. They were not as limited by censorship or regulation, so they could do a lot more. Shows on these channels had a higher budget too, and were much more popular. Also, they could air throughout the week, and were not restricted to Saturday mornings. Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network,
The GOAT.
Disney Channel.
Boo.
Kids were discovering quickly that they had options and did not have to wait until Saturday morning for cartoons anymore.
Facts.
Advertisers figured this out as well and took their money with them. Broadcast networks started to pay less and less for shows. Since advertisers weren't paying as much, the networks weren't offering as much to the creators. They wanted studios to make cartoons as cheap as possible. They did not even care if the show was a hit or not. Even if it was, that alone was not enough for the cartoon to make a profit. It would need to make up the difference in foreign sales and merchandising.
咻比咻比 go， 你在哪？我们有工作要做。咻比咻比 go，
What is
你
this?
在哪？我们需要你的帮助。
Basically, the broadcast networks decided to pay less for their shows. The competition from cable channels made it difficult, as they had less restrictions and a higher budget for their shows. This drew a larger crowd and provided a better place for advertisers. This was a severe blow to Saturday morning cartoons, one that they would never recover from. Next, we have angry parents. Yes, angry parents.
Oh,
As
Lord.
long as there are kids having
The
fun,
Karens.
there are parents complaining why it's wrong. Truth be
Karens.
told, I kind of side with the parents on this point. Let me explain. In 1968, a group was formed called Action for Children's Television, or ACT for short. Its purpose? To improve the quality of television programming offered to children.
Boo.
Basically, this is a group of angry parents who yell at people who make TV shows for kids. They weren't the only group, but they were the most well-known. And they actually had quite the impact on cartoons throughout the years.
Boo.
They called out Romper Room in the 60s and how the show was just a way to promote toys. In the late 60s, they went after superhero shows and claimed that they were too violent. Bye bye, Space Ghost.
What?
That's how I defeated Ceiling and then, of course, did sex. It was all action, Jerry. Magic and action.
Unbelievable.
And yet very true. And yet very true.
From the 60s to the 90s, these parents and members were adamant about changing television for kids. They rejected shows that blatantly
Who were they to speak for the kids, though? That's what I'm saying, though. Who are they to speak for the kids? That's my question. Who are you to speak for the kids? Who is you to take away G.I. Joe? Scooby-Dooby-Doo. Man, Thundercats, roar! Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Transformers. Who are you to speak for them kids? Talk about some, that's too much violence. No, the fuck it's not, man. That's why you can't have shit, because these fucking Karens. These fucking Karens is why you kids can't have good shit.
Advertised to children. They wanted more educational programming, and they wanted to limit commercial time. Wait, that's a good one. The 1980s were a crazy time where cartoons went
The commercials is what made it lit, though.
nuts with their in-show advertising. Most of them were just glorified commercials.
Cobra's got the formula! Cobra! The Mirage will stop him!
And there's Footloose, Flint, and Bazooka.
Get aboard, Bazooka!
G.I.
Yo, Joe!
G.I. Joe Mirage, Cobra Flight Pod, and Joe and Cobra figures.
G.I. Joe with the Kung Fu grip.
I mean, it's awesome, but it's obviously to sell toys. The ACT was finally able to get their way in the 80s and started by removing the Garbage Pail Kids off the air. They claimed that this show was violent, offensive, and was an advertisement in disguise. Is the show really that bad? Oh yeah, it's bad. In 1990, the ACT achieved a major victory with the passing of the Children's Television Act of 1990. It meant that broadcast networks now had to air at least 3 hours of core educational programming per week. There are a bunch of other rules mentioned in this act, but here's the short version of it. Regulation. That is the final point of my list.
The government.
The parents of the ACT were able to convince the government to enact these rules onto the FCC. The creative process was already difficult, but now it was crippled. I mean, yes, there were some shows that could prevail, but they were few and far between. Kids were now going elsewhere to watch their cartoons. To be honest, I don't understand why kid programming needs to be regulated. I mean, YouTube has lots of videos for kids, and those aren't censored. Never mind. So when you take into account the shift in technology, the arrival of cable networks, the outrage of parent groups, and the restrictions imposed by the FCC, well, it isn't too shocking that Saturday morning cartoons came to an end. The odds were truly stacked against them, and this beloved tradition could not withstand everything being thrown at it. Now, there is one theory that's tossed around a lot, and I have yet to mention it. While doing my research, many articles claimed that this cause was a major contributor to the fall of Saturday morning cartoons, but their evidence for it is incredibly weak. What is this mystery theory? Divorce. Yeah. Divorce. According to this theory, divorce rates skyrocketed in the 1970s and remain high to this day. That 1 out of every 2 marriages end in divorce. That means kids from these divorced couples bounce back and forth each week, and that they have no time to watch cartoons on the weekend. That they are going to see their mom or dad instead and go do sports and stuff. Such a strange reason. One that might apply to some people, but not everyone. I mean, my parents got divorced, but I still watched cartoons. And it's not like sports were invented in 1996 and prevented kids from watching their shows. Also, the divorce rate is not as bad as it used to be. It was high in the 1970s, but has dropped since then. Maybe the people who wrote the articles have personal experiences to back up this idea, but personally, I don't see it. And statistically, I really don't see it. There are greater reasons why these cartoons came to an end. Actually, one that I have left out so far is the internet and the role it played in this story. Many people claim that it was the main reason why Saturday morning cartoons died off, but that's not entirely true. Things were already looking bad for broadcast networks, and the decline started in the 1990s. They were hurting from the competition of cable networks and the restrictions from the government. All of these broadcast networks were on their last leg and were convinced that things were not going to improve. Their numbers were dwindling. And when the internet started to grow in the early to mid 2000s, well, that was the killing blow. Now that a person could watch cartoons online, there was no way that the broadcast networks could recover. One by one, they brought their animated programs to an end. The last broadcast network to air a Saturday morning cartoon block was the CW. Its animation segment was called The Vortex, and the show to end this sacred tradition was Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal.
Numeron code? Sounds important.
Number 96 seemed certain that I would ask for his help again. Will I truly need his powers to carry out my mission? Am I destined to draw upon his darkness in the future?
Well, that's it. Rest in peace, Vortex.
Funny enough, the episode was called Darkness Dawns, so that's kind of foreboding, but in my opinion, this was a very quiet exit for such a large part of cartoon history. No grand finale, no acknowledgement of its legacy, just a quiet death for an old tradition. Overall, Saturday morning cartoons were quite the contributor to the world of animation. Was it the highest level of quality or the most thought-provoking? No, but that was okay. They were fun, and that was good enough. For many kids, it was their first step into the world of animation, and it sticks with them. My father, for example, does not really care for animated movies or shows. He is a businessman through and through, but his eyes light up when he talks about Johnny Quest, a show that he grew up with and loves to this day. That speaks volumes to me and shows how profound of an impact these simple cartoons can have on a person. They might have been cheap, they might have been corny, and they might have been designed to just sell merchandise, but that does not take away how much they meant to the people who grew up with them. It's sad that they no longer exist, but it's not for a bad reason. Technology grew, and it opened the door for more options. We are no longer restricted to a single day of the week. We can basically now watch cartoons whenever we want. Also, cartoons are no longer limited to broadcast networks. Cable channels and the internet provided competition that wasn't restricted by censorship or regulations. This freed up the creative process and provided a way for artists to try out new ideas. But for many people across the world, they will never forget the joy that Saturday morning cartoons brought to them and how important it was to their childhood. A simple time where all you needed was a bowl of cereal and your favorite cartoon.
Facts. It'll never be a timeline like that, bro. It'll never be another time in our lives like that, bro. As you wake up this Saturday morning and turn on your TV, let me ask you this question. Did you turn it on because there was a device hooked up to it? And you was going to mess with that device? Whether that be a gaming console, a Fire Stick, a Roku Stick, Apple TV, Google Chromecast, whatever the fuck you got. Did you turn it on and try to skim through the channels to see if you can find you a cartoon to watch? Just good old days, man. There'll never be another time like that, man. You have to be there to understand, man. You have to live through these eras, man, to understand the importance of Saturday morning cartoons, man. Waking up, getting that big old bowl of cereal, turn on the TV. Getting up and watching Power Rangers, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh! Oh man, Looney Tunes, Tiny Toons, Animaniacs. There'll never be another time like that, man. So I just gotta remember the good old days, man. Give a fuck about these streaming sites and what they got. The Saturday morning cartoon experience is way better than the streaming sites. It's the streaming sites, there's no soul. They just take your money. But those Saturday morning cartoons, they didn't take your money. They gave you entertainment and gave you time. R.I.P. to Saturday morning cartoon.